You are now listening to theGrio's Black Podcast Network, Black Culture Amplified.
Hello and welcome to Writing Black. I am your host, Maiysha, lifestyle editor here at theGrio. And I am so excited to welcome you all back to our podcast about Black writers and Black thoughts, because we have an incredible Black writer with us today, one who I think has been the prototype for myself and so many other cultural journalists. She is a novelist, a journalist. You may remember her as the editor-in-chief of Vibe. She was at Billboard. She was at The Root. She's been everywhere. And she also has this incredible memoir that came out last year called Shine Bright, a very personal history of Black women in pop. It was very personal to me. And welcome to Writing Black, Danyel Smith.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
You are very welcome. I mean, I really can't say enough about, I think, the influence that you've had on an entire generation of writers, including myself, and hopefully more than my generation, which is also your generation, I should say. And, and also, you're still giving it to everyone via the Black Girl Songbook podcast as well. I got to shout that out as well. Yes. But we are here today to talk a lot about this book, which I know came out last year. It just was re-released in paperback, which is always a big feat for writers. We love that. We love to see it on paperback. So I expect everybody to be tucking this into their bags this spring, take it to the beach this summer. But I want to hear from you, because it's always better when the writer describes it. How would you describe Shine Bright to those who haven't engaged with this yet?
How would I describe Shine Bright? Well, it is what it says. It is. It is a very personal history of Black women in pop. It's a merge of memoir, which is my story, and biography, which is the stories of Black women in music that have meant a lot to me, meant a lot to my mother and her sister, meant a lot to my grandmother and her sisters. Women as far back as Ella Fitzgerald and before, all the way up to Beyonce and Mariah Carey and Janet Jackson, and how I've interacted with them over the course of my career and how they've interacted with the world over the course of their careers. And so it is very personal, and it was an emotional book to write. Yeah. It's always an emotional book to speak about, but it is. I always tell people it was a labor of love, but it was still labor.
Yeah, and you can feel it. This is a remarkable book for a lot of reasons, in my estimation. I read a lot of books, so I think, first of all, this is a new example, I think, of several that have come out recently, but a really unique example of what a memoir can be, in terms of this weaving of personal history with pop culture, like literally, and it's not linear, but it's incredibly poignant. It's incredibly relatable. I mean, I definitely felt that as much as you were telling your story, I felt you were telling my story. You were telling the story of a lot of Black women.
I was one of the free-ish breakfast kids, a gnar of cantaloupe down to the rind. Our morning care teachers taught us to sing the stylistics, Betcha by Golly Wow, Sammy Davis Jr.'s The Candy Man, and B.J. Thomas's Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. In memory, these teachers are soft. They smell like themselves. I can't recall their race at all.
In approaching a project like this, right. I mean, it almost feels like a little silly to ask, but I have to, because it feels a little chicken or egg in a weird way. How did this begin? Was it always intended to be both memoir and biography, or did that kind of evolve as you were approaching this process? I know this was a labor, as you said.
Did not start that way in any way, shape, or form. I was very committed to writing a history of Black women in pop. I had been maybe since right after I left Billboard. The book was actually purchased by another publisher.
Okay.
And I could not get the book done with that publisher or that editor. Or that agent. So it was a struggle those first few years. I couldn't pull it together. because I think I didn't know really what I wanted to say. I think my point of view was not intact. I was doing my best to be super objective and to include everybody. Well, if I wanted to include everybody, I would still be working on it as we speak. It would not be done. So one of the great things about, I did a fellowship at Stanford, the John S. Knight Journalism Fellowship at Stanford. You mentioned hardcover right before we jumped on the air, which was a hardcover magazine I put together when I was a part of this fellowship. But the other great thing that came out of my time as a JSK fellow was time to just think about what I was trying to do with this book. I always advise people in our business, do the fellowships, apply. They give you time to think about your next move, your next plans. I remember when I told my godfather, who I'm very close to, Bobby Carter, told him, I got the fellowship at Stanford, I got it. And he said, that's how white people in your field have been remaining sane, by doing these types of things. And so I had time at Stanford to really think. And what I thought about was I wanted to have a new agent, a new editor, and I wanted to be back with Chris Jackson, who, the legendary Chris Jackson at One World, Chris published my first 2 novels when he and I were both kind of puppies in the game. New agent, new editor, new conversations about the possibilities. And then all of a sudden we're talking about a hybrid memoir that merges biography, cultural history, and autobiography. And I didn't think I could do it. And then I said, yes, I can, though.
And you did. Yeah. I mean, I think to me, what is so brilliant about this book is it's just the parallels that are there between even what you were just saying right now in terms of thinking about who deserves to have their story told, right? Whose journey is worth documenting, whose trajectory is aspirational, right? And so, like, obviously, for those of us looking from a distance at your trajectory and, the places that you've been, the things that you see, the people you've talked to, the influence that you've had, nobody understands all the little, mechanics it takes to get there. And I think, and all the like minutia and the tiny moves that can advance or set you back years, when you're on these creative paths. And as a Black woman I was a Black woman in pop, so, I understood what you were saying here very intimately. And I was so grateful that you actually were very strategic in who you chose to highlight and how. It didn't feel exclusionary to me. It felt very pointed as you illustrated your own path. I also love that you talked there about the process. Very few people talk about that, the process of actually getting a book done and all the people that it takes to make that happen and get that out there. And I'm sure they think you could just pick up the phone and call whoever you want, make it happen, and maybe just mix it. You can, but I think there's something very telling about that as well. When we think about Black women in pop music, when we think about mobility, and I mean women on both sides, both in front of the camera and on the mic and behind it, that whole gatekeeping, being managed thing. What were you trying to say, I guess, about that in this book?
One of the things that I really wanted to do was make it a book about the details, as you mentioned. So often Black women and Black people, but particularly Black women, our stories are told in terms of being first. Yeah, she was the first Black woman this, she was the first Black woman that. And these are wonderful accomplishments, obviously necessary and need to be documented. But they can be flattening stories told through that kind of prism. Everything is just about, the rise and the thing. And no, what did you wear is my question. How did you wake up that morning that you did the thing? Were we wearing our hair braided? Were we wearing a sew-in? What were we doing? Did we feel confident? Had we just gotten married? Had we just broken up with a partner? Had we just had a baby? Had we just lost a baby? I wanted to talk about, also was very important to me to talk about the mothers of stars of these women. So often the fathers are talked about, and I do talk about some of the fathers, but I wanted very specifically to talk about the mothers, and not just because, this is a book about women, but also because so often we define people by the day, the month, the era in which they are born. And I think we always just take for granted like somebody was born on this day and died on that day. But see, if you were born, a woman is a part of that story, that mother's life. Born is like a woman's verb. And I'm like, what were the moms doing? How were the moms influencing the women to become who they were going to be, or not influencing? Let's talk about their lives. Let's talk about Marilyn McCoo. I always tell this story because it's crazy to me that I could not figure out why Marilyn McCoo, whose family is from Georgia, was not born there. She's born in New Jersey. And it's like she was born in New Jersey, but she was a toddler in Georgia. Something wasn't adding up for me. And I finally found out that her mother, who was a gynecologist back in those days, in the 40s, did not trust the hospitals in Georgia. So she would get on the train and go all the way to Jersey to have all of her children, not just Marilyn McCoo, delivered by Black women, OBGYNs. Stay there until the baby was, grown enough to handle the train trip back to Georgia. But that's what she did. So then that just places Marilyn McCoo's birth and life into a whole perspective.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so I wanted to make sure that I talked about the details of the women's lives, details, hair, makeup. These things make up a woman performer's life, but I also wanted to push back a little bit, honestly, on the idea of Black girl magic. I think that, yes, we are magical beings. I don't know how we would have survived without having some of that magic in us. The ability to cast spells and even to curse people. The ability to float through things that would kill others. Right? But pushing back on that a little bit, I wanted to get into the idea of Black woman creativity and Black woman work.
Yeah, I was about to say, as you said earlier, it was a labor. We're going to return to that because I do want to talk more about this whole Black girl magic thing in just a moment when we return with Danyel Smith and more Writing Black. All right, we are back with Danyel Smith and this week's episode of Writing Black, where you're talking about Shine Bright, which is Danyel's deeply personal and very comprehensive ode to Black women in pop. We were just talking about the whole concept of Black girl magic, which, may not be as buzzy as it was a few years ago, but it's still, I think, this trope that, to your point, has both been incredibly inspiring, but also it can be a little damaging. As you said, flattening, I think, is a great word. Flattening is a great word for that. Tell me more about your take on that.
We couldn't get through it if we weren't somewhat magical. We could not. Because the odds are stacked against us. Just like stacked. Like stacked on stacked on stacked against us. But I wanted in Shine Bright for attention to be paid to the actual work of creativity. Because we're doing it. So I want to talk about ideation. I want to talk about execution. I want to talk about managing people in your creative circle, people on your creative teams. I want to talk about, as I've mentioned, the minutia and the detail of, because it matters in this world so much, what a woman looks like and how she presents. For Black women in particular, it's just deep and fraught. let's discuss that also.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's work. It's work that men do not have to do, even Black men.
It's true. You have this incredible passage in the book. This is you telling your own story and talking about a woman who seems to have been a bit of a mentor for you at Vibe, and how she sat you down one day and like ran through this like a laundry list of like pitfalls for women in the industry.
Oh,
and you run through a few of them as well in terms of, another beautiful passage you write, and I'm going to be paraphrasing here, but you talk about being everything from this, this focal point of like lust and adulation, but also this like, low value target, and as a woman who survived years in the industry, I was like, and as a woman who got out for a reason, I'm like, yes, like I felt that in my soul. How much is riding on us? And there's also this thing, I referred to that woman as something of a mentor because I thought that was a very mentoring thing to do. But we also know that Black women don't get a ton of mentorship in general. We are typically learning on our feet. I'm like you. I did not get to journalism through a conventional route that a lot of my colleagues have. I didn't have a lot, I had to kind of get in and learn on my feet and do that whole thing. But we don't typically have the guidance. Is that something that you were trying to maybe also, I don't know if it was intentional or not. I felt there was a lot of guidance in this book. Was that intentional? I guess is the question.
I chose to, yes. I wanted to mention everybody that helped me. And I'm mad for whomever I forgot or left out because it just wouldn't have happened otherwise. I was grasping for it. I didn't even have, as I outlined in the book, I didn't even have my bachelor's degree until I was in my mid-30s. And then, typical Cancerian, you had to overcompensate and get both at the same time. But I didn't. So I didn't have those sort of college or J school connections or networks. And I think also very much, I also just didn't quite know how to act in corporate spaces. I didn't have training. My family is not like a corporate family. I mentioned my godfather. He was that first generation. My Aunt Victoria was that first generation. But my mom didn't go to four-year college. My sister also didn't have her degree. My younger sister throughout Shine Bright, my sister Raquel, Danyel Smith, newlywed, last name Bean. She's so excited. My newlywed sister at our big age, second husband. But, we didn't come from that. I didn't know how to act. A lot of times I failed miserably because I didn't understand the codes. I didn't understand the lingo. And so Terry Rossi is who you're mentioning.
Yes.
Who was the charts editor at Billboard when I got there, which was my first sort of corporate job.
Okay.
Man, if I didn't have Terry Rossi and people like her, if I didn't have Sylvia Rohn in my life now and for the last 20 years, and Sylvia and I have been friends for so long, the mentor-mentee thing has faded as if you're lucky will happen. And you just begin to be girlfriends and sisters. And so I'm blessed to have her, but I also had a lot of white males in my life early in my career. And I'm not going to lie, forged those relationships because I needed something. Yeah. And there weren't even that many women in journalism. Like if I'm at the San Francisco Weekly in the 90s, I was literally like the only Black woman on staff.
Wow.
I'm trying to think if there was a Black male in editorial. I don't think so. So it's like, how are you? What's going on with you? Where y'all going? Y'all going out for beer? I don't even drink beer. Don't now. You guys are going out for a beer? Oh, here I go. And so, I had to get in where I fit in.
Yeah. We are going to talk a little bit more about fitting in this crazy industry we call music and journalism when we come back with more Writing Black and more Danyel Smith. We're back with more Writing Black. Danielle, you were just talking about, and I think I could totally relate to this like the cronyism that you kind of have to like build up to have a successful career. People act like it's a bad thing. It is a necessity. It is what you have to do. People work with people that they like, and we know that. And when you're talking about being a Black woman, I think in any industry, that whole likability factor feels so fragile and it feels so tenuous at all times. You talk a lot about, and I love this because, what's so great about Shine Bright too is that we're really seeing, you're really giving this intimate look at how the sausage is made in terms of like how you're getting these interviews, how you're having these conversations, how you're building these relationships, and doing so not even as somebody who's naturally like a networker. Hi, I'm the same. Like right. Also and as well. But just the maneuvers that everyone is having to do to like get in the door, the facades that people, have to build, whether it's, Whitney Houston talking about how they had a man for her picked out, that, it obviously wasn't Bobby, but they had an idea of who this was, or yes. It's Mariah who has very fully, and I think with both hands, grasped her whole diva persona. To the point where she uses the word all the time. Yes. But
honestly,
one of the hardest working women in the business, quiet as kept, very intense about her craft and very, prolific songwriter, like ridiculously prolific. How do you feel, if we look at Shine Bright as a, it's both a celebration and a cautionary tale in many ways. What do you hope that, when you look at the pop stars of the day or the Black women who are trying to navigate in these spaces, when you're talking about like a Doja Cat or a Lizzo or whatever, what do you feel they get from a book like this?
Wow.
I ask because this is a book I could have used.
I hope they get some sustenance.
Yeah.
I also hope, in the best case, that they would see that they're part of a long and glorious tradition, which I think is important to feel a part of, to feel like a legacy, to feel like at least someone else was here before me with the machete cutting down the sugar cane and trying to make a path. I interviewed SZA recently for the New York Times Magazine, and first of all, that was it's amazing. I've been blessed to speak to so many women, Black women, at the zenith of their careers. And I'm speaking to SZA, whose name is Solana, and I say this or I say that, and some of her answers were so similar to answers that I received from women born 20, 30 years before her, that they were the same. And I said to her, I would get frustrated. When I look at the transcript, it's crazy too. I feel like, why am I talking to Solana so wild? But I am like, I remember it was so great. We were at her home in Malibu, a place that she worked so hard to get. She was very specific, intentional about wanting to be by the water. And she got that. She made that happen for herself. But she's saying things, whether it's about work or men or the industry or her hopes for herself or her hopes for her work. And she's saying things that I'm like, I thought we did this so y'all didn't have to do this. Like, I literally said this to her. I said, I've interviewed Whitney Houston. I've interviewed Beyonce. I thought folks did this so you didn't have to do this and have these answers that are like, well, it is what it is because of the way the industry is. I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
And it's so, I want to say it's frustrating, but it's more than that. It's heartbreaking. So I hope that someone like a Lizzo, like a SZA, like an LMA, who I love, but Janae Cole, like so many amazing women creating music right now and just on their first and second big projects. I hope it would give them some sustenance to say, I'm a part of a sorority of women who make things and get things done.
I like that. I like that get things done part. We're going to be right back in a second with more Danyel Smith. All right, Danyel, we are back, and I want to get into this generational thing that you and I share. I was born in 1975. I am a very proud Gen Xer, not the least of which, for I think lots of reasons. I really think we're the cornerstone of cultures we know it. So it's always hilarious to me that Gen X gets forgotten so often, because I'm like, so much of the stuff you love was us. But, particularly when it comes to music, I always think we were actually, not to start a generational war, y'all. I do think we were an incredible, musical generation in terms of just exposure. Like a lot of us had this encyclopedic knowledge of music just because we were like the first MTV generation, like when they actually played music. We're the first, we grew up on our parents' Motown. We grew up on yacht rock on the radio. Like we have all this breadth of knowledge there. Tell me what being Gen X means to you in that context, because I was just living for like all of these references. Like this is my childhood right here. Like this is my whole childhood. I was so here for the whole thing. But you're giving a musical education. So tell me, what does being Gen X mean to you?
It means, I think you articulated it so beautifully. It means so much. I think we have such a rich sort of musical, just stuff all around us. And then you add to that we created hip hop.
That's right.
So then it's like, I'm not here for any arguments. I'm just not. I'm not here for any
There
arguments.
is no argument.
No. And that's how we created hip hop, though. All those things that you mentioned. The yacht rock, the Motown, the disco, everything that we were listening to and coming up on. But I think for me, what Gen X means as much as, if not even more than, just like the musical stuff or even the cultural stuff. Because I had Thelma from Good Times, who I write about a lot. I write about Bernadette Stanis and Shine Bright.
Yeah.
I'm such an influence on so many of us. Gen X girls, Black girls in particular. But for me, the Gen X was for better and oftentimes for worse. We had a lot of freedom.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When I grew up I was born in Oakland. We moved to Los Angeles when I was about 10, and then I moved back to the Bay Area when I was 17 or 18. And then I moved to New York for decades until I recently moved back to California, to Los Angeles, right before the pandemic. I live in a neighborhood that I used to ride my bike through as a kid, my sister and I. And whenever I'm with anyone, especially someone younger than me, I call them my baby girlfriends. My girlfriends in their 20s and 30s. Beautiful, brilliant women to a one. And they say, "Oh, you grew up around here?" And I said, "No, I didn't grow up around here. I said I used to ride my bike through here." And they say, "Well, so you and like the family?" And I say, "No. Me and my sister." And I was 11 and she was 9. And we would ride all the way to the beach. 9 miles from where we lived.
Wow.
And back. And it would be like me and my sister, or it would be my sister and I and our little group of friends from the block. I remember when I would go to Oakland for the summers with my great-grandparents and stay with them, they would give us $5. And I would go to the mall, or we would walk up to Mills College and walk around. Like, what were we doing?
I know.
I don't know how any of us survived it.
I think about this often. And we didn't have cell phones. Like, what were we doing?
No cell phones. No cell phones. But listen, it made me so fearless, though. No fear about so many things. Like, the thing about being a journalist is, if you're blessed, you go places, man. And if you read Shine Bright, my childhood was tumultuous at the very least.
Yeah.
So I was always looking for like an escape route, be someplace other than where I was. And sometimes I wonder if that didn't ease me towards journalism too, aside from the fact that I just love to write and still do.
Yeah.
But when hip hop was new and people would say, "Where you going?" And I would say, "Well, I'm going to see Run DMC." They would say, "You will get killed up there." I would say, "I'm going to see Gangstar. I'm going to see NWA." And they would say, "Well, who you going with?" And I'm like that meme. I would say, "I don't know. We're going to see. Like, who want to go?" But if don't nobody want to go, I'm going. And this was even before I was a working journalist. I would just go. I wasn't scared to go. And because of that, man, I've been places. When you look up at your ESPN, as I was many, decades later, I'd never been to a gymnastics meet. I'd never been to the Middle East.
Wow.
And I was blessed that ESPN said, "Hey, do you want to go to Doha? Do you want to go to Qatar and see Simone Biles
yes,
compete in
please.
Worlds?" I didn't hesitate.
Of course.
I said, "What time does the plane take off? Let's go." And it's like that comes from riding my bike to the beach. I don't blink at it, and it's a blessing. I say I'm lucky to have lived through it. But that wildness, it stays in you.
Well, we're going to take just a minute, and then we'll be back with more Writing Black.
Danyel, I'm enjoying this conversation so much. I knew I would because I just see so much of myself in you, and I love how you love Black people, Black music, Black women, just love us, and that is always so fun to engage with. As much as listen, I think anybody who loves music or claims love music should engage with Shine Bright, but there's also obviously this other incredible excavation going here and all this research and detail, which is your story. And this idea of the hybrid memoir, which I think, we are seeing more of, which is very cool, is fascinating. But you are the core here, this journey, this improbable journey in some ways that you took, and then in other ways inevitable. And you write that this was a story you had tried to write, that there were aspects of the story that you had tried to write many times. How did this version come about for you? How I guess I don't want to say how harrowing, but how was that process of getting to the core of something that was obviously deeply formative, but also deeply painful?
Oh, it's deeply painful. Deeply formative in ways that still show up today. I don't have to be in the middle of writing about them for them to be showing up. Very emotional. When I think about getting through the Gladys Knight chapter in particular, it's just the amount of thinking about deeply painful things for a long time, then writing it.
Yeah.
Then rewriting it. Then someone's reading it and asking you questions about it in the editing process and the fact-checking process, because I have my own fact-checker. Shout out to Sabrina Ford, and who is a hidden figure in so much of this. Sabrina's so serious. If I said it was a sunny day in Los Angeles in December, she says, "Well, I'm about to go to the Farmer's Almanac and see if you're telling truths or lies." But people are asking you about stuff that is in your nightmares. My other ways of avoiding home included staying late at my junior high school, pretending to anyone who asked that I needed tutoring. I was always on the run from the aggression of my mother's lawyer, but not a lawyer boyfriend, Alvin, and the toxic passivity of everyone else. Alvin was bitter, is what I was told. That's why he drank. My mother said that Alvin hated happiness in general, but specifically yours.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a
Stuff
lot of
that-
trauma here. Yeah. And a lot of shame
Yeah.
that what I love is the way that you make shame so relatable. This thing that all of us live with some version of. Love is a strong word. That's probably the wrong word, but I appreciated how you talked about shame and how you talked about trauma and this idea that we were supposed to get over it, right? The things that we live with that are still, literally impacting our day-to-day lives. I just thought that was such a nuanced and honest way of writing about that. I really appreciated that.
No, I appreciate you noticing it. I do, because it's I tell people all the time, I appreciate the close attention to the text. I do. It's especially from another person that writes and creates and these things. I love it from anybody. I do. Any kind word you're going to give me about something I make, I'm deeply, deeply grateful for. But when you do hear it from somebody else who creates, who writes, it matters even more. So it was painful.
I mean, I think that idea of having to write about the thing that hurts you the most, like that's like,
and
like
then
my whole
not
body seizes up.
The point of not getting through it quickly. See, that was that's what I had done previously. I would say, yes, my childhood was very traumatic. And so anyway, next paragraph. So you have to sit in it though. See, I had to sit in it. And I had a great partner, my husband, who writes himself. Yeah. And he's a great reader.
Shout out to Elliot Wilson.
Yes, shout out to Elliot Wilson Jr., as a matter of fact. So Elliot, and I have my sister.
Yeah.
Who is my witness in all things to my entire life, as I am in hers. And my sister was first of all, she's a teacher. She teaches like preschool, kindergarten, first grade, stuff like that. And she's a dynamic and amazing teacher. And I told her that I was finally going to tell it. But I needed to know if she was cool with it, because, she's a teacher. And maybe she don't want her business in the street. Locked in the big linen closet for the crime of not having turned off its light. Chased around the big apartment on High Point with a belt. Chased with a hunting rifle. Beat and poked at with hangers. Me and Kel crouched deep in our clothes closet, hoping to be forgotten amid the stinking alcoholic fits. And she's the only one for whom I've asked permission. And so I told her what I was going to do, and it was an emotional conversation. I'm emotional. My sister's just listening. And I said, so, what do you think? Like, am I doing this? Am I telling the details of our situation? Because my sister's a teacher, and there's stuff in there about my sister not learning to read until way too late in life. She was 10 or something like that. And she basically said, you should have been told it.
So it's cathartic for both of you.
But now I felt late. So I had to get to work. And she read stuff early. It's been so wild between she and I on this, because I remember stuff she doesn't.
Right.
She remembers stuff I have either, that I don't remember or don't remember well. I was places she wasn't. She was places I wasn't. And so it's given us this wonderful opportunity, because we've spent a lifetime talking around things and speaking in shorthand has been our way of dealing with it. And this has given us an opportunity to talk about it in longhand, to acknowledge that, yes, it was awful, but here we are.
I love that. Here you are. This book is, I think anybody who loves music, anybody who, loves themselves, loves girlhood, should engage with Shine Bright. I ask this question of all of our guests, and I want to ask you before you go, because I know that you are a voracious reader, as well as a prolific writer. Who do you read? Who do you read? Who's inspiring you lately? Who are you drawn to?
I mean, sometimes I read the same stuff all over again.
Also a good answer. What are your favorites?
You're not going to get me away. It's so common to, I think, women like us and women in our profession. You're not going to get me away from Their Eyes Were Watching God.
Fair.
You're just
Always.
not going to do it. You're going to have to pry it from my cold little ashy hands. Like, there's too many biographies that I've read so many times. I think I've read every biography about Billie Holiday.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've read biographies about Barbra Streisand any number of times. English major Sylvia Plath, the unabridged diaries I go back to all the time, just because she says exactly how she feels. Obviously, we don't come from the same spaces, but there's still things that you can find.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I love that.
And then I think, I also like to read the work of people that are working in my same space, like Dr. Daphne Brooks, like Donnie Walton.
Love Donnie Walton. She's a friend.
Yes.
Love her.
Yeah, she's the best. So, man, I'm reading, obviously, Justin Tisley, who I worked with at ESPN, and his great book about the notorious B.I.G. I'm reading David Dennis and the great memoir he has about his father, David Dennis Sr., who was a civil rights hero. Just Isabel.
Yes. I'm sorry. I for our listeners, if you want to know which Isabel she's referring to, Isabel Wilkerson is one of the endorsers of this incredible book. So I don't think for me, I was like done when I saw that. I was like, Paula Giddings. I was like, but as is noted here, this is, as Oprah Daly says, delicious to read. And I really want people to read it. And I was so thrilled to have you on. And I hope you'll come back with what you're working on that's new, because
absolutely,
it's such a pleasure. But for our Writing Black audience, this is the incredible Danyel Smith, y'all. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
Now, when I tell you I could have sat and talked to Danyel all afternoon, all day, I mean it. But just like she said she had to stop on Shine Bright, we did unfortunately have to end our conversation. But she gave us some incredible recommendations, one of which is also one of my favorites this week, which is Donnie Walton's The Final Revival, of Opal and Nev. This is a book I want to say that came out in 2019, maybe 2020. And it's not nonfiction like Danielle's book. It is a work of fiction, but it is told from the perspective of a music journalist, of which Donnie Walton used to be. It is just as evocative of the lives of Black women musicians as Shine Bright is. It is wonderfully rendered, really gets into the dynamics of a lot of the industry and a lot of the politics that probably some of our biggest icons have faced over the years. And it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous story, an award-winning tale that deserves all the accolades it received, as does Shine Bright. So get into The Final Revival of Opal and Nev and get into Shine Bright, and we will see you next time on Writing Black. Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode of Writing Black. As always, you can find us on the theGrio app or wherever you find your podcasts.
Witty, honest, entertaining. Introducing Dear Culture with Panama Jackson on the theGrio Black Podcast Network. Listen today on the theGrio mobile app for all the Black culture debates you don't want to miss. Also available wherever great podcasts are heard.